So this is a complicated topic, and it is one without a clear resolution. But we're going to explore the challenges, and we'll be able to narrow down some of the issues that are here. This is a conundrum because it's not the same. This is a unique set of circumstances in the modern world, the state of Israel, and the state of terror as we know it. So I just want to first start, because we're talking about hostages, with a brief prayer for the hostages. Bear with me for a moment. This is from a day after in Johannesburg. This is Mel's chief rabbi. So this is a prayer, an ancient prayer that has taken on new urgency and relevance of this horrific hostage taking. The challenge that we find is, number one, is I don't want to be flippant at all or unfeeling when we deal with the different perspectives. Because what really happened here and has been going on is one where really Hamas made a catch-22 squared for the Jewish people, for the people who live in Israel and outside of Israel, for all of us. I'm going to turn my ringer off so it doesn't go on. In case anyone else is lost, I'll have to text. So what do I mean by that? Is that we're going to explore the ancient Jewish traditions and texts, where in general, when people took hostages, it was either to make them into slaves or for ransom. It wasn't to free murderers. What we're doing here, what's happening here in the land of Israel, and for the Jewish people, is a unique circumstance of some of the most difficult ethical issues coming together, intertwined one with the other, and none of them can be simply resolved. There's not a simple answer to all of this, but I do hope by the time we're done, we'll see some of the primary issues and some of the ethical challenges and some of the responses that will help. What I mean about this catch-22, just to give a little bit of a political analysis, which is not my forte, but just as an outsider looking in, what did Hamas want to accomplish? I just want to back up for a second. You know, there were different theories given about how we can stop this from happening. We can make laws that we don't do any prisoner exchange, any hostage exchange. Laws are laws, and they'll be overridden at some point. Or we could say we'll give the terrorists a death penalty. So that will solve it. There'll be no more terrorist exchange. The problem with that, of course, is that from the time that you capture them until the time they go to court, until the time they get the death penalty, is even a greater incentive for them to kidnap and to kill. It doesn't, if they need it, they don't need a greater incentive to kill, but a greater incentive to kidnap, if that's the issue. If you say, you know what, take no prisoners, kill them first. Well, it's an option, but what you end up with is the sad, tragic event where a hero who was stepping forward to protect Jews from terrorists got killed himself. We'll find out, was this person out of bounds or not? There seems to be a deeper investigation going on, just as a tragic story that happened in Gaza proper, where the soldiers killed 3 hostages. So, in other words, killing first in a war zone can make more sense. In a civilian place, less so, but also there are unintended consequences that can't be easily resolved. So what do I mean by the catch-22 squared? Catch-22 is from Joseph Heller, who wrote a book called Catch-22. And the basic premise that he said is the only way you don't get to go on bombing runs, this is in World War II, the psychiatrist said, is if you're insane. And if you don't want to go on bombing runs, you're sane. So you're stuck. You have to go on bombing runs. Because if you don't want to go, then you're sane. The only way you don't get to go is if you claim you're insane. But you don't want to go, so you're stuck. What they did was, what the Hamas did, what did Hamas do? Hamas has to be able to hurt Israel and survive to win. So what does it mean to win? To win for them is that they are now more popular than they were before. So by taking hostages, they hamstring Israel's ability to respond. They felt maybe, we don't know what miscalculations they may or may have not done. We don't know exactly, but these are all calculations that went into it on a very simple level. Although I'm sure there's more as well, but on a very simple level, they massacred people. So in other words, if you took away their incentive of getting captives, it wouldn't necessarily stop the bloodshed. If they knew they weren't going to get back any hostages, they would have just killed another 200 people instead of taking them hostage. On the other hand, possibly they would not have done this incursion unless they thought that with the hostages, they were able to checkmate Israel. So we have to think about, in other words, even though we're not military strategists here, we do have to think about the ramifications and repercussions of everything that is happening here, because as we're going to see, this will have a play in the ethical issues. So there has to be a meeting of analysis of what motivation is and what success is for them. I just want to say on a very simple overview, they can hamstring Israel's response by taking the hostages, because Israel's going to be careful to some degree about bombing the tunnels, about flattening areas, about going down and getting the place where Sinwar or whoever it is surrounded by hostages, because there's more of a challenge. Doesn't mean that Israel won't take risks, but it will hobble Israel's response. Number 2 is, if they're going to, once they pull in these hostages, if they can cause Israel to lose soldiers in costly ambushes and booby traps, that will again sap Israel's willingness to fight and willingness to make a compromise of some sort. That is their plan, and that was their plan. And the reality is, if you look at the Arab papers today, they don't believe Israel's claims about how many soldiers have been lost, because in history, in urban warfare, there hasn't been, we have in Israel 160 Israeli soldiers to 6,000 to 8,000. That is not what that any of them expect in urban warfare. That sort of numbers that Israel so few have been killed. Shouldn't be any. But I'm just saying there is an element going on here where they wanted to. That's why Israel's going slower. They want to booby trap and ambush because here's the one element which plays into the whole hostage issue. In Israel, the soldiers are everybody's children because everybody serves in the army. Number two is their children. They are seen as young adults, and many of them are at the cusp of their life. And Israel values life. It's a culture that loves life. And this is what the Hamas and terrorists never tire of saying. We love death. You love life. Checkmate. But it's not just playing chess on one level. Not just that. It's also on many other levels. So number one was taking hostages and hamstringing Israel. Number two, cause Israel serious losses, God forbid. Number three, believe it or not, it doesn't take much. Everyone sees this now, and nothing is too cynical for them. The more Gazan women and children that get killed, the better off Hamas is, because they are then able to put pressure on Israel from America, from the West, and from Israeli society itself of Genukshain. How much already do we have to do? It is putting them in a vise. They say this themselves. If you go on the Arab websites, a memory that translates it, they say our victory is built in the blood of martyrs. In other words, by our women and children who are dying. I'm not sure if they signed up for this or not. That's another conversation for another time. It's a victory for Hamas. Why? It's putting pressure on Israel, making Israel look bad. They've been able to use this to put Israel as Nazis, genocidal, killing civilians. Civilians are dying. Who's doing the bombing? Israel, whose fault is the Hamas. That's already too far for most people's logical type of contortions that they have to make. The next element is to mobilize the West Bank and ignite it. What's happening now? The West Bank, Hamas, is more popular because even though thousands of terrorists have been killed, and thousands, if not 10,000 already, have been captured or imprisoned from around the area. I'm saying not just Israel, not just Gaza, but even the West Bank. However many are in prison today, many, many, many have been arrested, and many, many have been killed. And the 100, 200 that were released is being pitched as a great victory. Why? Why? Because if I can force Israel to do something, I win. If they come to West Bank and they're greeted as heroes for a little stabbing attack instead of all these big terrorists who are being killed, real serious terrorists. Meanwhile, they're letting women and children who did stabbing attacks and bombings, the junior league of terrorism and just in training, what's in baseball, what do they call it? Whatever they call it. The minor league, the T-ball, or whatever it is. Anyway, the Pee-wee, the small little terroristalach that they're releasing, or of course they can take lives, are being treated as a great victory in the West Bank. Why? Because we forced Israel to give someone up. You just lost 10,000 people, 30,000 people. This is a victory. You got 200 people in the West Bank. Well, yeah, for the West Bank, it is a victory for Hamas. Why? Because the West Bank is now, Hamas is more popular than it's ever been. 80%. It went down a little bit in Gaza. So there's another element there. Plus, this is, again, Hamas's strategy. Mobilize the entire West, the media, to paint Israel as the bad guy, which was easy to do anyway. It's a pre-existing condition. So they're just making it worse. That's happening too. Then the next one is, all these things are working together. Ignite a broader conflict. If they can ignite a broader conflict with Hezbollah, with Syria, with Lebanon, and maybe even further with Iran, and maybe even further Turkey, or maybe even further a world war, they win. They win no matter what. Now they've become popular. Who remembered them? They were in Gaza. They were forgotten. All of a sudden now they're the world stage. They're the big machers in town. They just have to survive to win. That's all they have to do. And they brought Israel to its knees. Israel was in chaos for a few days. Israel now is on the defensive. So if they could pull this off, they win. No matter what, they win, they say, unless they're totally destroyed. Which the odds of that happening are not great. Because of all the internal pressure that exists, and not just external pressure. Israel itself has to have some recognition, and it does, of where we're headed. But there's all sorts of other challenges in Israel itself. It's civil war about identity that, without talking badly about the Supreme Court, now reignited for no reason other than that two of them were going to be forced to retire. And if they retired, the court would have been more conservative and they wouldn't have been able to win. So they pushed it through. They rammed it through in the last 3 months because of they knew that the court would be different. The makeup of two people would be different. So an 8-7 type of vote. Now, I don't believe this issue should even be brought up, but the fact is, Sinwar, I mean, whoever came up with that name, Sinwar, I mean, can you imagine? Yamach Shemai, may his name be erased. But the point is, he was watching, he's a student of Israel. He reads Hebrew, speaks Hebrew, he reads the literature. He's watching what was going on, and that was another thing that would make Israel weaker. So, on many, many levels, because of all these issues, some of our understanding of a simple hostage exchange at the end of a war, for example, is very different than what's happening here. This is not about getting hostages back. It's not like we're getting Palestinian prisoners. It's about destroying Israel. In other words, once we recognize this, it's going to change. I know I'm jumping ahead of myself, but it's clear from what they say they want to do and what they did. This isn't just to free, when you hijack a plane, to free your comrades like the early hostages. So in other words, terrorism has changed. You know, once we had 9/11, where those who hijacked an airplane no longer want to get out alive, no longer have demands that have to be met, but rather they want to use it as a guided missile and to spread terror among the civilian population and cause them to leave the Middle East, and then later on, however else they're going to push their agenda. So what happened in that moment, from now on, when someone hijacks a plane, we have a very different view about how this is going to end up. We say goodbye to our loved ones, we try to tackle them. We no longer think, oh, they're going to try to trade for a few prisoners, for 100 prisoners, 200 prisoners. It changed the equation. Hamas's issue that they did both massacre to break Israel's spirit, the rape and the torture, the horrendous things that they did was to break Israel's spirit and to make Israel feel hopeless and helpless and cause people to leave, which is why all the news stories that come from the Arab world, they talk about how many Jews are leaving, and which is why so many are careful not even to go out on a trip at this time period. And many are going there specifically to show that we're not leaving, we're joining, we're making aliyah. So in other words, once we understand that it may look like ransom of captives, Pidyon Shivuim is the Hebrew word. It may look like hostage exchange. It's not really what it's about. It's an attempt to destroy Israel right now, clearer than ever. Now, this wasn't always as clear with hostage exchanges, and the lopsided nature of Israel's hostage exchanges, which have become more and more pronounced, it wasn't always this clear. Right now, it's becoming clarified, at least for everyone who's privy to the secrets that I'm sharing with you in this class. All of you are now hereby informed. No, but everything here, all the strategists understand much more, but there's no question things have changed about how they do this. So I just want to share a short video of the Rebbe, the beginning of the lopsided exchanges, and I want to differentiate. At the end of a war, when you trade soldiers, it's always lopsided. Because if I have 25 soldiers of yours and you have 1,000, we're done. We're not enemies anymore. We have some sort of not ceasefire, but a armistice, right? As you said, armistice, or whatever it is. So we're done. We're done fighting, and then we do the exchanges, and we're back to our lives and our homes. That's not what this is. What happened was when terrorist groups began to kidnap soldiers or civilians or things like that, where it became much more lopsided. So the first one that was lopsided was one, I don't want to use the names, it was named after the poor Israelis who are freed. So I don't want them to be remembered by that they're the cause of murderers coming out. But either way, I think it was 83, there was one like for 80 for one, 75 for one. And then later on, the Jabril deal, which is, I think, 1985 for 1,000 terrorists. And then you had the big one, which was the Shalit deal. Okay, let me share, though, a screen of the Rebbe talking about from the point of view of the ramifications of, of these issues. In other words, even early on, the Rebbe was saying, how do we have to view this? It's not just the narrow issue here. Let me make this larger. Bear with me.
Ich werde am meisten von der Jiden, was so gefunden bei Chevy. Und was
Sorry, do that again.
Bei
My
Chevy
finger is in the way.
Bei Chevy in Zatschkenegel. Bis wann es mit dem Messgebiet nach Fettlech und 70 von Zatschkenegel. Begoli hat ihn gesagt, aber wie bald lassen nicht. Ich werde am meisten von der Jiden, was so gefunden bei Chevy. Und was ihm die gewollt herauslassen. Bei Chevy in Zatschkenegel. Bis wann es mit dem Messgebiet nach Fettlech und 70 von Zatschkenegel. Begoli hat ihn gesagt, aber wie bald lassen die Gewänke in andere Brille. Und wie bald hat das Aiden mit ihm gesprochen. Wenn hat sich nicht gekonnt rechnen, wie viel mit der Fahrer rauslassen. Von Beis Asurim hat ihn das so getan. Beschaß, mir sagt das Am in Teine. Und Rachmon el-Islam, jeder Rede verweitigt, und der Heta Asipur, als in der Gewänke in andere Wege befreien, seien wir befreit, 70, trachte bei sich, öfter das der Weg, und sie öfter in die Gewänke in andere Weg, und Nefe, Schachas, mit Israel, ich kiem Eilemol, Halachas kam, es rät sich mehr nicht wegen 70. Hatten angesagt, die Räder und die Schreier in Eretz Akedisch und in Chutzloris sollt machen, als Schweig, wer 70 sein, Adrabe, man soll machen, Simches, wie Hilulis, und wir wissen, dass da andere, was meise sibische Tiere, wenn sie das Sof mit Galle sein, bis wann es dann mit Galle gewinnt. Als zwischen die etlich und 70 gewinnt, a Timata halb, und die, was eine dort nicht gewinnt, bei Beis Asuri, wegen Inyonim shel Mabekach, was viele wegen Inyonim shel Mabekach hat nicht angehalten, die Schiete, Jorno Hanan, auf nicht noch geben sich in die Jumi von Terroristen. Ich dort gewinnt, Korif zu halb bettlich von 30, und die, was haben Befehl, sich vernommen, mit Inyonim shel Meise Chavolo, bis Meise Chavolo, was hat gekostet, nicht Forschis Mamosh. Eibse, das ist der richtige Tag, mit der Time, wie Chulu, was hat ihr davon gemacht, das so? Da konnte ich Atchile sagen. Aber wie der Meise ist Befehl, nur dem hat kein Brede nicht mit der Time in Pschut, in Zahn im Kmus, wie Chulu, muss nach Riesel, nach Monil-Islam, nach Ratschen, was sagt Befehl, ich auch halte, welche Leute heuer bis hier. Das am meisten, was wir können, haben zurück. Die Etlich und 70 gefühlen sich bei Kopfschi und gefühlen sich in dem Mord, was Rachmon el-Islam heuer bis hier, wir sind nicht gesieben, aber sollen sich nicht mit Stadel sein, noch einmal heuer bis hier. Komur, in Friedrich ist wahr, das Bescheid Rachmon el-Islam mich speit. Und weiß, dass sie gespiegen im Pfanne. Setzt mir in einer zweiten, dass gisch mit Broche. Und heißt soll machen a Broche, die Ateva Ameti, nicht a Broche Befehl, machen a Bankett und machen a Maseltov, soll tanzen in die Gassen und nur wegen vorne mit allen Sachen, was sind damit verbunden.
Can't hear you, Yossi.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Okay. The Rebbe's point was that number one, at that point, there was secrecy. They didn't want everyone in Israel to know they were letting out murderers because you have all these families that lost people. So the problem is there's dual pressure going on. There's pressure from those who lost people. There's pressure from people that don't want to be killed in the future in the streets by terrorists. And then there's the family who's struggling. Now, that was a soldier in that 1979 clip, I believe it was. Even said 85 there. But either way, the challenge of allowing the murderers, whose the Rebbe's words were from about achalti, I'll eat and I'll eat again. It was a euphemism for someone saying, I did it once, I'm going to do it again. They're not. No one's claiming here that they've been rehabilitated. You know, they're out to kill again. So the question becomes a few-fold about issues of endangering others. What right do we have to endanger others? And even in Western law, every society has an obligation to protect its civilians. If you destroy the court system by letting murderers go, that is a human rights violation for your civilians. It's not a simple thing. Leaving aside Judaism, but we're not going to look at the Western world also has challenges. And the Rebbe mentioned, you know, when you talk about even exchanges, which we're going to get to, what does America do? Now, today, America no longer, Obama and Trump both did trades with the Taliban, and that was after hostilities had ended officially, which caused them to kidnap more afterwards because they needed more in their arsenal. So people were kidnapped, civilians were kidnapped because they had done some trades. But the issue is that in general, America would not trade hostages as compared to other countries. The Western country would give millions of dollars in ransom, and America didn't. It did not make it worthwhile to kidnap Americans. America was very good about it. It's different when you have a country like Russia takes hostages from America by, you know, then it's more like a spy exchange, even if it's a false accusation or it's not false. We don't know if the CIA is telling the truth, the KGB is telling the truth. But either way, it's not thousands or hundreds or tens for one. It's one for one. That is, when you talk about these type of things, it's one for one. So we're going to talk about lopsided, risking lives. So without further ado, I'm going to share the screen of the text that we had. Let me go first there. Second. So here we go. Oops. Okay. Let me close that one. That one's closed. Then we go to this one, and then we're going to share it. Share screen. Okay. So you have the text here. So it's 7:30. So I'm not going to. I'm gonna go relatively quick for some of the issues. But here's the. Whenever we look at, make a bit larger on the screen. Whenever we look at a halachic question of this sort, we have three questions. Is it obligated, forbidden, or permissible? And as far as, I'm looking here if I can see everyone's faces. Where am I seeing? Here we go. Good. Even permissible, there could be permissible and respected and seen as an ideal. You don't have to, but you could, and it's beautiful if you do. Or it could be permissible and seen as something negative. You're a fool for doing something like that. So here's the dual questions. Number one is, are you allowed to save somebody's from imprisonment, from being a hostage, whose life is in danger, we're working with that assumption, by endangering other people's lives? Is that acceptable? Is that permissible? Is that obligatory? Number two, can you endanger the hostage's life by not exchanging terrorists for the hostages? In other words, can you leave them there? Or how about, here's another question, it's not on the paper. Here's another question. Can you send in soldiers to risk their lives to free hostages? Are the rules of war different? Are the rules of endangerment different for a war? Is this part and parcel of a war? Or is this something different than a war? And if it is a war, how are things different in a war? What is the role of society and government and military in the rights to endanger their soldiers? What are their rights to endanger civilians for the greater good? There's a tremendous amount of balls in the air here. So let's go through some of the text. Text number one. Text number one is one of the first stories we have of the Jewish people. Abraham, his nephew Lot, is kidnapped, taken as a prisoner of war. And Abraham goes to war against these 4 kings that had conquered the 5 kings, and he recaptures his nephew, and he frees all the people. He could have kept them as slaves, as servants. They offered, the slaves and servants were offered by the kings. He says, no, I don't need them. They offered him money, he didn't take it. He freed them. So we have this idea of freeing captives at the very beginning of our narrative, our story of the Jewish people, even before Yitzchak is born. And in the story in the desert, there's also a story of hostages, reading number 3. That the story is that when the king of Arad, who seems to be an Amalekite king in disguise, he engages the Jews in battle and takes a captive. So our tradition tells us the Hebrew is singular. So the commentaries say he took 1 captive, a maidservant. He took someone from the edges of society. And the Jews make a vow. If we can get back this hostage, everything that comes into our hand, we're going to give to you, oh God. We're not going to keep the spoils. We'll all be given to the temple. And they're successful. This idea that the Jewish people feel a need to go to war and capture back this captive, a maidservant, okay, a worker in the kibbutz, if you will, you know, that is seen as something that we have in our Torah. There's a story of King David. King David is he comes to a city. He was first with the Philistines, and he ends up rejoining the Jewish people. But in that interim period, the Ziklag, the city, is captured. It's all burnt to the ground, literally like what happened in the kibbutz. But they didn't kill anyone. They took all the captives, all of them, all the women and children. They took them off. They didn't kill anyone. And David comes back. Take a look at verse 4. And the troops with him broke into tears. This is King David, warrior men, till they had no strength left for weeping. That's what they did first. First they wept. They had no more strength. His wives had been taken captive and all the others as well. And verse 6, David's in great danger. Because who do you blame? Netanyahu. I mean, King David. You blame the person in charge. If you would have done A, B, or C, it would have been all your fault. So David sought strength from Hashem, and he brought the ephod, the breastplate, which is Yale's logo, Truth and Justice. Because he didn't go to Harvard. No. Anyway, so he says, they bring the ephod, and he says, shall I pursue them? Will I overtake them? I'll be able to even get them. And Hashem said, pursue, you shall overtake, and you shall rescue. And they went, and they were successful, and they smote them, and they brought them all back. That is the story. But this idea of what happens to the Jewish people, this thing of taking captives and the burning of the city and the brokenheartedness and the desire to go and get back is something that is clearly in our DNA. It's not like we say, oh, people don't care. The opposite, we care. We care a lot. The question is, can we sometimes care to such a degree that we endanger others and end up perpetuating this sort of violence and these sort of hostage taking? It's clear. Once we told Hamas that we can trade 1,000 of your soldiers for 1 Jewish soldier, it became the price. And he himself said, and many of others said, if I got 1 for 1,000, so if I have 100, I'll be able to get 100,000. I'll empty your prisons It'll be such a victory. We'll be starting from scratch again. I'll have everyone back. We'll crush Israel's spirit. We'll show that they can't win. Why? We raised the price. We raised the price. Sinwar was a prisoner. He came out and did this, and many others like him. There's the other one that was just exterminated, just disposed of in Beirut. He also was a murderer, vile murderer of kids and women and children. We had him in Israel 6 times in prison, and he was freed as well. So the issue becomes, this is not to be hard-hearted towards those who are in prison, but just to look back clear-eyed. Now, the reality is a guy like Netanyahu was very against originally prisoner exchange, but he did go through with the Shalit deal and with other things like this. So again, the numbers now are back down closer to normal, at least for women and children, 3 to 1 instead of 1,000 to 1. But when it comes to soldiers, we're not sure what will go. And the question becomes also, what is our sensitivity towards soldiers versus citizens? Soldiers have a unique thing. We'll make a movie about it called Saving Private Ryan. What's going on here? You're going to risk 8 people's lives to save 1 person, because part of war is you don't leave your wounded warriors behind. Part of the value system of war, which may very well be intrinsic to war, because you need the camaraderie. The question becomes, with a hostage, what are the unintended consequences? There was something called the Hannibal concept. The Hannibal, which Israel, because they were so afraid of hostages being taken, if an Israeli a soldier was taken hostage in Gaza, in one of these places, the Hannibal doctrine was bomb the heck out of the building that the guy went into, even if you kill your own guy. It was seen as better he should be dead than he would be taken hostage, and then that would ruin the morale more. Killing your own soldier would ruin the morale less, because you ended up doing these lopsided things. Now, the Hannibal doctrine has been rescinded because there were different understandings of how exactly, when it was applicable and what degree was applicable among the soldiers in the field. So officially they rescinded it. But it was for a while part of how Israel was going to deal with this. Horrific types of conversation about what happened because of it. Okay, so here's the issues, and this was fascinating. Sometimes you're going to read in well-meaning Jewish writing, or maybe liberal defeatist. They're not necessarily the same thing, but defeatist type of things where surrender. The Jewish value of redeeming captives is the most important thing of all. It's true, but even there are limitations. Let's look at that. Okay. Redemption of captives. Here's Maimonides. It's a classic. The redemption of captives takes precedence over supporting and clothing the poor. There's no greater mitzvah than redeeming captives. For the captives among the hungry, the thirsty, the naked, and those whose lives are in danger. There's a biblical verse that implies this. It says about when they led off into exile that, you'll see in a moment, we have it. A person who ignores the redemption of captives transgresses, you shall not harden your heart. And another mitzvah. You should not shut your hand from your needy brother. And another mitzvah. Do not stand idly by your brother's blood. And another mitzvah. He shall not rule with vigor over him in your sight. He also cancels out the mitzvah. You shall surely open your hand, and the mitzvah your brother may live with you. Love your neighbor as yourself. Save them and be taken to die. And many similar mitzvahs. There is no greater commandment than redeeming captives. Now, just to remind everyone, normally in the ancient world, captives were taken for either ransom or slavery. So redeeming them is an important element. There's an interesting thing. I didn't bring this down. I didn't bring this quote. I didn't bring this source. But there's an interesting thing about not helping captives escape, because you're going to endanger all the other captives who are then going to be put in chains and irons. In other words, are you going to cause, if you get an individual out, one individual out from being held as captive, what is going to be the response of all the other captors toward their captives? Let's talk about time like after the destruction of the temple, when there are 1 million Jews in captivity throughout the Roman world. If you help Jews escape, what is going to be the response of the Roman captors to the many more that you can't help escape? They'll put them in chains and irons. Be a lot worse for them. So it's an interesting question, a separate moral question about your alleviation can then endanger more people's lives. Again, and make their life worse. So there's an interesting element about this is not the same thing here, because as we're talking, you see it's a different ball game. There's different moral challenges, but it's important to recognize there are different types of limitations that are put in play. Okay, we don't, the Talmudic quote in 8 just tells us that since God in the text in Jeremiah talks about telling the Jewish people after destruction, some are for death, some are for sword, some are for famine, some for captivity, that each one is progressively worse in reading number 8. So therefore, captivity is seen as the worst. Why? It includes all the others. There's famine, there's sword, there's possible, all the other things that come along with it. But there are limits in Jewish law to redemption of captives. Okay, here's a famous Mishnah, very important Mishnah people quote. Captives should not be redeemed for more than the value because of tikkun olam. Jonathan's favorite word, tikkun olam. Tikkun olam here does not mean social justice. We're going to debate what it means. That's why it doesn't mean that exactly. It's related, so you'll see. But first of all, what does it mean, their value? What is their value? Who determines value of a slave? We just told us life has infinite value. So what is value? And then what is tikkun olam? Talmud discusses what is tikkun olam first. Tikkun olam doesn't refer to the burden which may be imposed on the community or to the possibility that the activities of the captors may be stimulated. Is it a monetary concern? Or is it a danger of more people being captured, endangering more lives? What do I mean, a monetary? Is this a fiscal policy that if you say, hey, no price is too high for my Jewish brothers, and the thieves and the kidnappers say, wonderful, 10 million, 100 million, a billion, make yourself bankrupt, no price is too great. What's going to happen is you're not going to be able to survive as a community, and you won't be able to help others. So we have to make a limit because for fiscal reasons, monetary policy, allowing the communities to survive as communities. It's about the community being able to survive. The second interpretation is you are going to inspire, if you give a good price, hey, this is the way to earn a living. You're going, all these guys that are trying to make money selling crack or selling whatever, Potagon, whatever the Hamas terrorists and Hezbollah terrorists and Iran terrorists are selling, all the different drugs. There's heroin coming from Lebanon. There's this Potagon uppers speed stuff coming from Syria. There's other stuff coming from Iran. That's one way they make a living. Another way, ISIS made a living, well, hostages, ransom for Western countries. The more you... excuse me, the more you give, the better it seems like a career choice. Honey, what are you going to do when you grow up? Kidnap. And the Jews are the best kidnap. If the Jews pay the most, honey, that's where you go. Kidnap a Jew. If you kidnap someone in Sudan, they may have a sign, save my girls for 15 minutes, and then they forget about you. The Jews will give you what you want. So we're concerned. You're going to make it an incentive for people to kidnap. Don't give more than their value. The Talmud asked the question, wait, Levi, the son of Darga, ransomed his daughter. She's a lovely girl, but 13,000 dinars of gold. That's a lot of money. That's $100 million, $10 million, whatever it was. So we seem to have a proof, the Talmud asked. And the rabbis answer, who says he asked the rabbis? It's my daughter, he said. I don't care what Jewish law says. I'm going to go and ransom my daughter. We don't know. The Talmud is not clear. In other words, we have somebody, and this is going to be the issue. This rule about not ransoming more than they're worth is sometimes observed more in its non-observance than its observance. As we're going to see, there are exceptions to the rule and limits to the rule. And when the limits are overruled as well. This is going to be issue. But Levi ben Darga, the Talmud is working. We don't know. The Talmud does not conclude. One more time. Is this a fiscal policy or is it about saving people from being kidnapped? Big question. And I'm just going to give you the majority of rabbis throughout the ages have felt it was more about protecting lives than a fiscal policy, okay? This doesn't mean that fiscal policy isn't there, but it's not considered the main issue. And there will be a difference in law. What's the difference? Take a look. Rashi says, because of the burden to the community, that's tikkun olam, that's the first one. He says, but you're going to impoverish the community if you give too much money. Or to the possibility that the idol worshippers will be risking their lives to kidnap Jews because it's a good business. It's a great business model because they can sell them for great names. So they'll work harder to get Jews than anyone else. So you're going to make an incentive. The Jews all of a sudden become a plum catch because the Jews will redeem hostages. And the reality has been throughout history that along the Mediterranean or other places where pirates came, they knew that the Jewish community would come out to redeem their captives. But in general, the rule was don't pay more than their value. What does that mean, their value? We'll get to that in a second. But what would be the difference? Now, here's a little bit of Talmudic logic. What's the difference between the reason, if the law is don't pay more than their value, whether the motivation is fiscal policy for a community or endangering individuals, what's the difference in law? Look what Rashi says. The practical difference is regarding a situation where the captive has a rich father or relative who wants to redeem him for much money and not hold the community responsible. So if I want to redeem my brother, God forbid, and I'm a billionaire, so if I give $1 million, which is more than the value, let's just work for a moment just so everyone can be on the same page. Let's work with the value being the slave market in the olden days. So whatever the value is for a 70-year-old guy, that's what you pay. Give him a little extra $5 to make it worth his while. But don't push up the price. But wait 1 second. If it's only because I don't want to impoverish the community, so the communities won't raise money and pay more than the value. But any individual who's a millionaire, does well, can redeem. Why not? Doesn't hurt the fiscal policy of the communities. It won't impoverish the communities. Excuse me. Okay. Any thoughts before we go further and allow me to cough into my tea? Okay. So far, is it fiscal policy or is it life-threatening? And what's the idea of values? I want to give you another idea of values before we go further. Value number one is what it costs in the slave market. Another ancient interpretation is what the nations of the world pay to redeem their hostages. In other words, not slave market. Even if there's no slave market, even if no slavery, what do the nations of the world do? Why? Because you don't want to make an incentive. You have to be in line with international criteria. If England and France are paying $1 million per hostage, you can do that. From when ISIS was fundraising or getting hostages, right? We're not yet talking about endangering life. That's another issue by freeing murderer. We're now talking about what is the price that one has to pay. We'll get to this, may be related to captives, but right now, the value is either the slave market or it's going to be what other nations do. That is much more workable for us today because you could look at policy. What do governments do to get back their citizens from the enemy? Now, this is not perfect for a variety of reasons, but let's just leave that for a minute because my enemy may not be the enemies in Sudan, maybe different enemies, right? So what they do and what their incentive to attack us may not be the same. They may hate the Jews more than the Sudanese enemies hate the Sudanese. We don't know that. Okay, but let's go a little bit further. Sorry. I'm not going to do everything here, but here. So Tosafot is a commentary on the Talmud, and he has a question. He says another story in the Talmud. There's a case where where the wife was kidnapped, taken hostage by whatever they were, pirates or whatever it was, and he paid 10 times the amount. And the ruling there was that for your wife, you have to do that. The question is why. So you have three different answers, and these three different answers are all possible interpretations, but each one makes a exception to the limitation of don't pay more than its value. Number one is a wife is like your body. In other words, the Talmud had a question about the guy who redeemed his daughter, and we weren't sure if he followed Jewish law or not. But your wife, you're obligated, just like you're obligated to give everything, or you're allowed to redeem yourself from prison. No one says that you can't redeem yourself. I can redeem myself, and my wife is like my body, and therefore you're allowed to redeem her. That's answer number one. Number two is there's a story where we'll see the next story in a minute, that in the time of Rome, okay, here's the problem. I must have mixed the two things up here. What happened was that in the Talmud, after the destruction of the temple and Jews were taken into slavery, so a rabbi was in Rome and he saw a beautiful child who was brilliant, and he paid a tremendous amount of money to free that child, and that child became a great leader of the Jews, Rabbi Yishmael, son of Elisha. He paid more than the child was worth. So Tosfos now gives why is that acceptable. Reason number two, Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah redeemed the child. Why? Because he was exceptionally wise, and therefore the people of Israel needed him, or he would be beneficial for everybody in a very revealed way. That's an attempted answer. Third was, after the destruction of the temple, when all the Jews were taken in captivity, there's no more incentivizing, capturing. The markets were flooded. If you read the accounts, the Jewish slaves are going for $5. Why? Because there were too many slaves. I got to feed them and clothe them. They didn't have enough economy for them. In other words, the slave markets of Rome and Alexandria were flooded with Jews. Hundreds of thousands of Jews flood the market. Everything dropped. They made it price drop. There's no longer incentivizing. You paid one for one kid who's going to be a great scholar. You paid, too much money because the market has crashed, and you give a tremendous amount as if it was good times. It doesn't matter. You're not going to change. The market dynamics are so out of control. There's so little that Jewish slaves are going for. You're not doing anything. So therefore, that case was unique. So what we have here, just to throw it out here, we have a question of if someone's a great sage, number one. I'm sorry, number one is a wife or yourself. Number two is a great sage. Number three is if the situation changes, which is an important element going on here, that when the situation changes, you have to take that in consideration as well, about when is it considered more than its value. In other words, there was intent here for their reasoning about creating tikkun olam, something to fix the world. To fix the world means either to cut down on Jews being kidnapped or to allow Jewish communities to be sustainable. One of the two was tikkun olam, okay? But either way, the situation changing, don't get locked into, this third answer of Tosfos says, don't get locked into the paradigm, don't pay more than it's worth, because sometimes it doesn't matter. Because if you're in a situation where the market is flooded with slaves, you're not going to change it. So, for example, we have to ask, when things change here, like it did in Gaza, and like it does with the incentive, and what it does with the intent of Hamas, what matters here? Okay. Let's go a little bit further. Okay. This is the story, reading 13. We don't have to read it again. He was a brilliant child, and he redeemed him. Here it is. So, Tosfos here gives another. This is very important. Number 14. So there's another answer, that the reason why you are allowed to pay more, whatever price is demanded, if the person's life is in danger. Reading number 14. If the person, in other words, slavery normally was not, your life wasn't in danger, immediate danger. They didn't want to kill the golden goose. You're able to work. Why would they kill you? They could sell you. It wasn't like they were all sadists. It was an economical choice for them to have slavery. It made sense for Romans and for others. So the point is, however, if you're in a situation where the guy is threatening to kill the person, or he's a terrible boss who beats the Jews up, and and it's going to kill him. So then you could pay any price. To save the life, you could pay any price. This is a very important element, which is coming up right now. Any price. Any price. We're willing to give any price is what people are saying in Israel, especially those who have hostages. But really, really, will they give any price? Do we give up Ashkelon for a terrorist? Do we give up Tel Aviv? Do we all move to Boca? Do we give them tanks and missiles? Do we give them a nuclear weapon? Well, what's every price? I never understood those movies and books. Maybe this doesn't say much for my taste in reading, but where the bad guy puts a gun to someone's head or to someone's kid head and said, "I'm gonna kill that person if you don't give me the nuclear codes." Honey, we're all dying for the nuclear codes. We're killing millions. Well, how does that help? I'm gonna save this one person. In other words, this becomes really the question. It may feel like I'm just letting free 1,000 terrorists, but what's been happening has been a mobilizing the entire radicalization of and helping radicalize, even though they didn't need that much help, but helping them think that they could be successful in their endeavors. You taught them that this works, and this is seen by them as victory. We've taught them this. We trained them this. If we would have been tough, like America was in general, we wouldn't be in this situation of that point. Now, it doesn't mean they wouldn't try to kill us. They would have tried other things. But this idea of captives per se, and not just that, let's be honest, part of the reason they felt they were able to get away with the slaughter and murder and breaking the spirit of all these people and torture was because they took these captives. This was going to be their protective shield. They don't have an Iron Dome. They have a dome of Jews. This is going to protect them. Did they miscalculate or not? I don't know. I'm not sure what degree they did or didn't. Could be they did. With God's help, it'll be a massive miscalculation. And they'll be totally destroyed and wiped away with all wickedness. But I don't know. And they don't know. Not yet. We don't know where things will go in a minute. Okay. Here's a historical precedent. Mayor of Rottenburg. Now, this story, historically, some recent questions have come up about it, but it is an accepted story for hundreds of years, even though it happened about 1,000 years ago. Here's the story. This is from the Maharshal. He's writing this. He's writing in the 1500s, and he's referring to something that happened 300 years earlier. I heard about our teacher, a mayor of Rottenburg, may his memory be for a blessing, who was held captive in the fortress for a certain number of years, and the king demanded a exorbitant ransom, and the communities wished to pay. Mayor did not allow. He said, "You're not allowed to ransom cat for more than the worth." I'm flabbergasted. He was the leader of a generation. You can ransom all the money in the world. If, due to his humility, he didn't consider himself a great Torah scholar, he should have at least considered the amount of Torah learned that would be lost. Where he's sitting there without Torah and light. How can he not consider this sin of Torah? He wants to be humble, let him be humble. The public needed him. Clearly, his opinion was if they ransom him, one need fear less all the rulers take the greatest Torah scholar generation in captivity. For ransom so great that the means of the African communities would not be sufficient to ransom them. You'll take them all and be no more money left. As it was, this King Rudolph, I believe who it was, King Rudolph then tries to kidnap his student, the Rosh, Rabbeinu Usher, who has to flee to Spain and becomes a leader of the Sephardic community, but he runs away because Rudolph, the red-nosed leader, is chasing him to kidnap him because this is what he was going to do to get money. Mayor died in prison, and it wasn't until years later, according to tradition, that he was able to, the Jewish community pitched in to redeem him and bury him. That was they wanted to stop this horror. No negotiation with rulers, with Rudolphs, for overpriced rabbis. Too much. We're going to make it an incentive for them to all kidnap. This is how he understands it. I also heard the same evil rule wanted to seize the student, Rabbeinu Usher. He got wind of this and fled to Tiltilla and was saved by God's compassion and mercy. Because of this, the Maram said it's better a little wisdom be lost than the total loss of all Torah scholarship. And this is a sign that he was correct. At that time, they ceased seizing diaspora agents. That was it. The kidnapping stopped. Because they saw it didn't pay. The rabbi said, "I'm willing to die in prison rather than make the community pay my ransom." Precedent. Okay. Let's go a bit further now, though, to the challenge of endangering life. We're not going to read every one of these readings, because really this could be 10 classes. So here are the other moral issues. There's a mitzvah in the Torah. Love your neighbor as yourself. How much do I have to love you? If I'm walking in the desert and we have one jug of water and there's only enough for one of us to survive until we reach the next place, do I have to share it with you and both die? Rabbi Akiva says, the Torah says, your brother shall live with you. You have to survive, then he can survive with you. First, put on your own mask and then help the child with their mask. First, take the water that you need to live. Of course, if you have more, give it to them too. But the issue is, if you are for sure going to die, and this person might die, maybe someone will show up, maybe something will happen. But right now, I don't have to kill myself to save you. Who says his blood is redder than yours? Okay. You have to live with, oh, that's a different line. That's a different line. We'll use that in a moment. Okay. So basically, the issue is Rabbi Akiva taught that your life takes precedence. So you do not have you are not obligated to give up your life to save someone else's. Okay. So here's a story from the Torah, from the prophets. There was a king who led a rebellion against King David, led a revolt against King David, and people were following him, and it was becoming a problem for the whole kingdom. So he had to be taken down, and he fled into a city. And he came to this city, this is reading number 19, and they put a battering ram, and they made a ramp in order to knock it down. And a wise woman came forward and said, "Are you Yoav? Listen to my words," she said. "Why should you destroy Ir Ve'ein Yisrael, a city that's a mother of Israel? We didn't do anything wrong just because he hid here." Says we don't want. He says we don't want to kill your city. We just need him. He's the one. Give us him alone, and we'll leave. She said, "We don't want you guys in our city. We'll send you down his head." And she goes back and she came to the people and said, "Look, this guy rebelled against the king. He's endangering all of us." And they kill him and throw his head down to Yoav, and Yoav leaves. Was this the right thing to do or not? The Talmud debates it, but here's Jewish law. Rambam. If Gentiles tell a group of women, "Give us one of you to rape. If not, we'll rape all of you," they should allow themselves all to be raped rather than give over a single soul to the Gentiles. If a Gentile told a group of Jews, "Give us one of you to kill. If not, we'll kill all of you," they should allow themselves all to be killed rather than give over a single soul to the Gentiles. You don't have a right. This is the trolley car question. The trolley car question goes like this. And again, this is not so simple, and there are many levels and layers of this question. The trolley car is going down the track, and there are 5 people on the track, tied down. You have the ability to switch tracks and only kill one person who's standing on the other track. Do you make the switch? Do you kill one rather than 5? Do you knock the arrow or the hand grenade to kill fewer people? Do I knock the missile out of the sky where I know it's going to kill other people, but fewer people? What is the right thing to do? Now, in war, we'll have to talk about war is going to be different, but a lot of these questions. But not in war. The trolley car. What does one do? So here's the basic idea in Jewish law. I cannot take an active, there's debate, but I cannot take an active role in shortening somebody's life. I cannot kill one in order to save many. I can't kill many. The question becomes with a trolley car, who's the one that started it? Who's the one that's moving it? It's not so simple. And there could be some other variables in that time, but I can for sure not kill one in order to save many. Let's put it in other words. Someone walks into a hospital, healthy guy, he's coming to visit, and the doctor says, "Oh, we have a patient that needs a heart, a liver, a kidney. We're doing eye transplants and a brain. Chop, 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 chop. This guy just became an organ donor, and he just saved 20 lives. What a mitzvah boy he is." Would anyone say that's acceptable? To kill someone to save 20 lives? In war, we do it all the time. And we learned about that. In war, someone's coming to kill you, kill him first. You have to win. War has a different dynamic. But to take an active individual who is sinless chop him up to save 20 people. You can't do it. The question of the trolley car, and we'll keep it relatively simple because there are many layers and ways of we can, do it even more complicated. But on a simple level, you cannot kill one to save many. You cannot actively kill one. You can choose who to save because you can only save one. If two people are drowning, you don't say, okay, both of you drown, I'm having a cigar. You have to save one. You choose who to save. But to kill, you can't kill one. You can't say, the oxygen in this room is only enough for one of us to breathe. Let me kill him so that I can breathe the oxygen. No, that's different than the water. The water is in my possession. It belongs to me. It's mine. I can't kill him I can't steal his water and kill him either. And I can't say he's worth, I cannot take an active role to shorten somebody's life. Okay, this is an important element in Jewish law. Okay. So now, however, if the Gentiles single out a specific individual and say, give us so-and-so or we'll kill all of you, different rules apply. If the person is obligated to die, like that story in the text about the one who led a rebellion. In other words, according to the laws of the country, if this guy did a capital crime, or the laws of the country, whatever it was, so then you could give it over to them. However, you shouldn't let the enemies know that you're willing to give him over. Negotiate, try to get away from it, just because they think they have a right to kill him because of a broken law doesn't necessarily mean that this is a legitimate court of law. It's the nation acting in its way. It may not be halachic, so you try not to. But if he broke the law of the country, which has a death penalty, you're allowed to evict him. You're allowed to extradite him. You're allowed to, if you are being faced with, I'm going to destroy all of you if you don't extradite this guy, you're allowed to, if the guy is guilty of a capital crime. But if they say, we just want to kill one Jew, we don't care which one, you're not allowed to pick one. You can't even do a lottery. What you can do, someone can volunteer. And there are stories like that in the Talmud, where these two brothers volunteered and admitted to killing a princess because the king wanted to kill everybody. Someone stepped forward, I'm going to kill all of you. That's the way it was. They volunteered. They were allowed to volunteer, and this is an important element. You're allowed to volunteer, but the people cannot choose. You can't force others to go and die for someone else. So here's an interesting question, and this is related to danger to life, which we'll get to in a moment. The Ridvaz, he had a question where the ruler said, I'm going to kill that Jew, or I'm going to cut off your arm. You choose. I'm going to amputate your arm, or I'm going to kill him. That's how I'm punishing the community, for whatever reason. King had a bad day. His wife wasn't, I don't know what it was. So what happens? The rabbi says, you don't have to put yourself in danger, because amputation is not always so simple, especially 500 years ago. It's not always so simple what the amputation will be. You could die. Have in mind, my father just had an amputation today. She had a complete speedy recovery. So I'm bringing up amputation. Now I'm at Chaim Ben Brina. So, Baruch Hashem. Well, but going back to our story at hand, he said, you don't have to endanger your life. Because in those days, amputation was more dangerous to lose a life. So it's an important thing. You're not obligated to endanger your life to save somebody. This is an important element. Okay, I'm going to do a few more pieces here, and then we'll close with a closing and with a video. Okay. Saving life. If you remember, we had this quote before, number 22. If you're able to save someone's life and you fail to do so, you transgress a negative commandment. Reading number 22. Do not stand idly by your brother's blood. Similarly, if you see someone drowning, there's some level of danger in all these things, even if you're very strong. There's some level, but it's acceptable danger, it's seen as minor danger. Okay? You're supposed to step and not stand idly by. Whether money or body, you're supposed to save people. Is there a higher level of responsibility to someone who is a first responder? Absolutely. Is there a higher level of responsibility for a fireman to go into a fire than a lay person? Absolutely. That's what they signed up for. And the same thing with a soldier. Whatever the laws of war are, one of them is you risk yourself for society as a whole, which I'm letting the cat out of the bag. This is very important, where soldiers have, and war is slightly different. But now, am I allowed to, as an individual, these things all have ramifications. As an individual, am I obligated to endanger myself? So here's a story. From the Jerusalem Talmud. Rabbi Isi was captured by bandits. Rabbi Yonasan said, prepare the shrouds. These bandits are known to be killers. We can't do anything. We're weak. There's nothing we can do. Reish Lakish was his comrade, was his student study partner. The dirty secret about Reish Lakish was he had started out at a certain point in his life, he had been a bandit of tremendous strength, and he did tshuva. He repented and became a great Torah scholar. Trust me, his students did not mess with him. And listen why. He said, I'm going to go. Either I'm going to kill or be killed. I will not let Rabbi Isi be killed by bandits. I'll go and save him by force. He went and negotiated. He went with force, knowing he might be killed, but he ended up negotiating with him. They handed Isi over to him. That was it. He was successful. Rabbi Yochanan was about to gave up on Isi. He was already mourning him. He was already preparing their eulogy. Rabbi Yochanan, not my friend. Okay. I don't want to pick on Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan was not a warrior like Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish, there's stories with him. He was captured by either gladiators or cannibals, depends on the translation, and he takes care of himself. He puts a stone in a bag and he kills them all. And he gets out. He's not another time Rabbi Yochanan is mugged and is robbed. And he goes to that corner of the city where all the gangsters hang out, the family that robbed him. And the family says, if that's Rabbi Yochanan coming, we'll give him back half. He said, it's Reish Lakish, you give me back everything. And he was a tough guy. So no proof, number one, that everyone else has to do this. However, some say that you're allowed to endanger yourself to save others, like Reish Lakish. Others could argue with that, and they do. We're not going to read everything here, but the Rabbi Yosef Karo quotes this based on this idea. He doesn't quote it directly, but he says you're allowed to put yourself in a level of danger to save another Jew from an absolute life-threatening situation. This issue, doubt versus absolute. If that person is absolutely going to be killed, can I go in and try to save Waxman, the Jewish soldier who was kidnapped, and they went in, Waxman got killed, and the leader of the Jewish commando force got killed, if you remember that story. And this is happening all the time in Gaza. People are endangering their life to save others. So someone else is in sure danger, and I am in a possible danger. I'm allowed to go in and try to save them. Am I allowed to give my life for someone else? Can I throw myself on a grenade, even not in war? Possibly. Some say you're a fool for giving up. Why is your life redder than his? Why is his life redder than yours? What's the reason you're giving up your life at his expense? Oh, to save many? That makes sense. One for one? Why does it make sense? Why should you die and he live? Why should you throw yourself on a grenade to save one person? Not necessarily that makes sense. However, you have permission to do so, and it may even be ideal to save many. The question becomes, and this is an important element, in army and for the state of Israel, what is the role of morale, which we'll get to? Here's a code of Jewish law. The code of Jewish law, it's in different places, but here it's a mitzvah to desecrate the Shabbos and save a person in danger, but you don't have to put yourself in for sure danger. Somewhat, if you have a doubt, he says here, nevertheless, he says, if there's mortal danger to the person attempting to save, you should not endanger yourself to save them because you're not in mortal danger and he is. So in other words, in general, the understanding of most authorities is that you shouldn't endanger yourself. If someone's for sure in danger and you're going to have a good chance of being killed, you shouldn't do it. Here's the numbers game that some say, if you skim down in 28, how it's reconciled. Here, Rav Avad Yosef says, towards the end of that reading, he said, if the 50% chance or more of death, you're not allowed to save your friend. You're allowed to do with a high risk you're not allowed with such a high risk of death to save his friend. Again, leaving aside military right now. This becomes a question about surgery. When they started out with giving up kidneys, giving up liver, and all that, if it was more than a 50% chance that you would die, you're not allowed to do it, to give it up. Less than 50% become maybe possibly allowed. And then when it comes down to another element, it's still not obligatory. 1 second. Why is it not a mitzvah for every Jew to give up the kidney? The highest level of living organ donors in the United States are religious Jews. 15% of the total organs donated from living donors are Orthodox Jews. Now, they don't give, as a rule, organ donation after death, because that's problematic halachically. But living, they are 15%, and they make up 0.1% of the population. But 1 second, is it obligatory to give my kidney, my liver? It's not obligatory, because I'm putting my life in danger to some degree. So it's not obligatory. Giving blood is probably obligatory to save the life for somebody who's there. Okay. So here goes the issue about war. War is different, is the argument. So here is the idea of endangering life. All those rules we're saying. Now here's the question. Is what's happening with the terrorists and the Palestinians war? Is it war? Some would argue, hey, buddy, you're letting 10,000 of them every day from Gaza come in and work in your country. That doesn't sound like war. That sounds like there may be people there at war, but it's not, the nation is not fighting. You have West Bank, they're farmers. They're coming in and out. Is that war? I was like, yeah, it's war. Just that not everyone, we're checking them, we're making sure, but it's a low-grade war since 1948. This war hasn't changed. It's morphed, but it's still been a desire to wipe out Israel off the map. And it hasn't changed. It had ups and downs. So here's the thing, an ancient source, that when you talk about laws of danger, those same rules do not apply to war. Because war, the mitzvah of war, is to put yourself in danger to save the people of Israel. And it's a mitzvah. If I'm the commando paratrooping in, I'm putting myself in grave danger. How much is a king allowed to lose of his population in a war? There's limits, 6 of the population, okay? In other words, war to save your people and not retreat to another place and whatever it is, up to 6th of the nation. God forbid, God forbid, God forbid. My point is, war has a whole different ballgame, because the definition of war is endanger yourself to save the civilians and the civilization and the nation. So here's a story where I don't know if this rabbi was that popular with his friends anymore. Here it goes. This story happened. I forgot the name. How do you pronounce it? Sabina? There was a plane from, I think it's Belgium. Yeah, Sabina Air was hijacked to Jordan. And Rabbi Hutner, one of the leaders of world Jewry, was on that plane. He was a great student of the Maharal of Prague. He was a great leader of the non-Hasidic world. And his students, based on what we learned about somebody is a great leader, you can pay more than the price. Now, these people wanted to get hostages. They didn't want to get cash. I mean, they wanted to get prisoners free. That's what they wanted in Jordan. So they wanted to offer, not prisoners being freed, they wanted to order a significant amount of money to the terrorists in order to free this rabbi. This one rabbi, his students wanted. They felt, he's my father. He's a great scholar, a great leader. The Jewish people need him. So look what happens. What happened was, though many, third line of number 31, many rabbis were of the opinion that every effort should be made to secure Hutner's release. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky dissented, arguing that the mitzvah of Pidyon Shivuim, of redeeming captives, only applies in peacetime, but surely not during hostilities, when the delivery of ransom money to the enemy would strengthen their position. I can't give you guys money. I can't give you tanks. I can't give you oil. I can't give you fuel, because it's making you stronger and kill more people and cause the war to go on. This is a war. We have to get rid of it. In other words, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky was of the opinion that you cannot be supporting and giving and making the war go on. It's war. War has different rules. He said, even though a ceasefire existed at that time, the 1948 War of Independence had never really ended. For the Arabs' avowed goal to destroy the state of Israel and drive the Jews into the sea had never been renounced. In his view, although Israel was only a war of attrition in some way, terrorism, attrition, it was not engaged in active battle with nation states. In the eyes of Jewish law, it was considered to be an experience of mere lull in the ongoing original 1948 War of Independence. Now, I will just say, the question becomes the right to send in soldiers to save people and at the risk of their life, or to free murderers at the risk of everybody else's life, is not a simple situation if you're trying to save the lives of those people there. I would just say, you have long-term, by lopsided and releasing murderers, you have weakened the Jewish people and the Jewish state and endangered many. That's the reality. Can you put this genie back in the bottle? Ultimately, I do believe the lesser evil is to kill the terrorists so you don't have them in your prisons, because realistically, the terrorists, you're releasing fewer murderers then. I don't mean in death penalty, I mean in battle. Realistically, that would seem to be, even with the danger to other people and civilians, if you were measuring. But it ultimately really does come down to what the society decides, and the government is elected by the people and has, just like a town and a city and a community has these rights to make certain type of decisions that endanger. The problem in my mind, though, about all that claim, which some rabbis make, is what about all the Jews of the diaspora? We didn't vote for these people in Israel. If you're in Argentina and they blow up the building, could you let those terrorists out? Who's taking care of them? Who takes responsibility for the Jews in Kazakhstan, in Georgia, in Georgia, in all these places from terrorism? In Iran? Who's taking responsibility? It's not so simple. It's not simple, but I do think, realistically, the lopsided thing, the murderers, all that, has not been a good thing. So even though I am hesitating, I would just say it has been a bad thing. It's been a bad thing. And the people that were released for 1,001, there's no way that person doesn't have nightmares about what came about because of all the well-meaning mothers who put pressure on the state of Israel. And again, this is not to be uncaring. It's a tragedy of the making. This is what the catch-22 squared that they have created. That's what they wanted, and that's what they did. The question is, how do we get out of it is another conversation. Let's close with a video of the Rebbe. It's a 7-minute video. And
Israeli tanks and troops, backed by air and sea bombardment, crossed into Lebanon before dawn.
The aim of the invasion was to stop attacks into Israel.
The Rebbe said you went into Lebanon in self-defense because there was terrorism emanating from Lebanese territory.
Palestinian guerrillas struck at the northern Israeli town of Ma'alot. Of the 100 children held hostage by the guerrillas, 20 died and 70 were injured in the shootout with Israeli troops.
You're also in a state of hostility with Syria, and if need be, if you have to continue going forward even into Syrian territory, then you should do it. And Israel should do it. It's Israel's right. You're protecting Eretz Israel, you're protecting Jews.
Wenn es aus der Chonkim der Linie von Lebanon ist gewähnt als zugegerichtet Tochnis, wo wegen der Tochnis haben gewusst Israeler.
President Reagan, in a letter, urged Begin to keep a cool head and not let the fighting spread. Begin replied that he hoped that President Reagan understood Israel's position to destroy the PLO military force in Lebanon once and for all.
Schaas mit das nie durchschmieren. Wird sich sehen, dass viele Jiden haben mehr, aber ich will schön haben, dass viele Jiden sind nicht fein. Und vielen ist eigentlich Maschine, dass viele in Milchemes Mogen, nicht Milchemes Mogen auf Kibush Arotzes, Milchemes Mogen von Hazar, Hazerer, Bearzicher.
It was a bomb before the bus, and they're shooting from the back.
הייתה מלחמה מאוד מאוד מיוחדת במינה, מלחמה שבה כוחות צבא הגנה לישראל הגיעו עד לביירות ועד בכלל.
6,000 Palestinian fighters have been trapped.
so of thousands of civilians.
On June the 11th, Israeli armor reached the outskirts of Beirut itself. There it rested as political argument in Israel took over.
Dies steht mir sich dort in einer Masse Miuchet, in einer speziellen Masse, was mir darf beistehen dem Nisoi, was hat schon getroffen und mit Rachmon el-Islam durchgefallen. 3 Mal Bisisse oder 4 Mal. Aber die Mumchen, die Bitochen, der Anschi Zoller, haben gesagt mit klaren Wörtern, aber mir darf gehen und Maschlim sein, das, was man hat angehebt. Und als sie sagen sie noch mit noch mehr Starkheit tegen Tischchen.
הרבי אמר לי, בסופו של דבר נלחמים כאן בטרוריסטים, ברוצחים, שבאים להרוג, והציווי שלנו הוא להקדים.
Es hebt sich an mit Zedek und mit Jesher und mit allen Sachen. Und allein sagt man, aber ich hasse letztlich wegen Pikuach Nefesh. Und PLO seien sie nicht scheiches zu Zedek wie Jesher. Mit was hat man sich vernommen, einander schicken Brief und ein Reis und die Choches und Schaklevitaris Reis, als PLO sei nicht ein feiner Mensch. Sie sind doch in Perrodnen, was bleibt, davon auf das Reis.
PLO forces were scattered among the civilian urban population on the living shield principle advocated by their Soviet advisors.
International criticism of the Israeli occupation has not eased up.
The inherent right of self-defense.
2/3 of the United Nations boycotted Prime Minister Begin's defense of the Lebanon invasion.
President Reagan said today he's lost patience with the continuing bloodshed in Lebanon before another shaky ceasefire went into effect.
Hat man gehofft, der was darf das durchführen mit Pashtus und mit Pschitus, wird sich nicht rechnen mit der Das von dem Mugelleben von der Pantonim. A viele werden angerufen, a Politiker oder a Minister, der kann jetzt übersetzt, als bei mir das klar, das in der Geld, der Pikuach, Nefesh, von der Kammer wie Kammer von jedem Befehl.
PLO stood as hesitant Israeli assault for over 2 months.
The Begin government insists all of the PLO leave Beirut and that not even a symbolic presence remain in the city.
אין תבונה רבה, הוא אמר, בזה שמנהלים את המלחמה ומותירים מאחור פתח פתוח שמי שאתה מנהל נגדו את המלחמה, אתה מותיר לו את הפתח לברוח ולהיעלם ולחזור אחר כך במשנה כוח כדי לפגוע בך.
והם גלו לתוניס. וערפאת גלה יחד עם אנשיו בתוניס והקים שם את המפקדה שלו.
Hakel jedi, als der Fieber sie will nach Reisgen Beheirung auf Chesef käme, ist gleich ankommen, die Kenene von die Medines, wenn sie haben alle Lewuschi, mit alle Ski, mit alle Kehli, mit alle Kleinesche, sei Kleinesche Karl, sei Kleinesche Kobe. Bemerken der Ruf, keine Sache nicht gewinnen.
Israel is very fragile, very touchy from pressures they put on her politically from outside. So what I understand from the rabbi is to stand against all those pressures.
Wenn am Muncha in Unione bitochen, wo das ist die Anschi Zoller, sagen, als sie dürfen sich fühlen, wird das eine Anweisung von Schulchan Aruch, eine Anweisung von den Mebischten, das ist der ämste Weg zu einem ämsten Scholem und zu einem noch bis wann der Scholem wird werden bei Milui, hat mich schön, der muss schaften wie ein Nachried.
We need something more spiritual to hold the all in line. And for me, it was the rabbi meeting.
לפי זיכרוני, הפגישה ארכה כשעתיים. עסקנו במלחמת לבנון, ואני חושב שהיה לו חזון גדול. והוא לא נטש את החזון אפילו לרגע.
eine Sache, was tut weh, hat mit der Brennen, nicht muss man auch geschreiten. Weiß, dass schreien wird, weiß ich nicht kleiner wird. Aber nicht, schreit mit seiner Sicht. Schreit, was tut weh. Da ist da ein Kolpon und etwas, was Hoffnung. Aber mit Schreien noch einmal und noch einmal. Und nicht nur nachher ein Pargo, nur mit Zeta, mit schämt sich nicht und mit schreit sich. In Efter wird das Sov der Nehmen und mit Einstellen beloschen an die Priorities. Als zum allen Menschen darfen versorgen, wie Tochen von der Hadorim Oleo, von den Jiden und Nicht-Jiden, was gefunden sich in Erzakei. Und besorgen das in der Echid, in der Chater, lechelerig, mit dem Bitochen, dem Lebischen, was Shemer Yisroel, Leonen und Leishon,